Hi, this is Greg Kihlstrom. Welcome to Season 3 of the Agile World, where we discuss customer and employee experience, organizational and workforce transformation, and how business can adapt and continually improve in an agile age. The Agile World podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To read more about the topics discussed in this show, you can go to my website at theagile.world and read my latest articles, or get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, now available on Amazon and other retailers. My name is Greg Kihlstrom, and I'm the host of the Agile World podcast. Welcome to a special episode of the show brought to you in partnership with Arlington Economic Development, where we discuss issues related to the workforce, the role of place in the future of work, and the role of the creative sector in a larger business context. We call this Return on Creativity. Today we have an excerpt from our September 14 event, Return on Creativity, Return on Leadership. I hope you enjoy. The name of the panel is Leading by Example. We've got Shonte Eldridge from Amazon Web Services, Nancy Green from Avius, and Leon Scioscia from Workhouse Arts Center. And we're going to talk about a few things here. I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves and their roles as well. But to begin our final panel of the day, we're going to talk about leading by example and the role that leadership plays in building the future workforce and the future of work. To get things started, we'll go around the panel here, and what I'd love if you could introduce yourself and what you do, as well as answer the question, what's the biggest leadership lesson you've learned so far from the pandemic? Shonte, we'll start with you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having us today, and hopefully you guys can hear me okay. Yeah. So my name is Shonte Eldridge. I'm an executive government advisor with Amazon Web Services. And so if you're not familiar with Amazon, we're a part of Amazon, like everybody knows about Prime. And my role is to really work with our government leaders, and that could be the CIO, the CFO, the chief of staff, the elected official, and helping them create new different technologies that are really going to improve how they deliver services to their constituents. And the one thing that I learned during the pandemic through leadership is, as you can imagine, we got very busy at Amazon Web Services, AWS, when the pandemic hit, because governments realized, oh no, my website crashed. I have no call center, and my entire staff, just went home. And all the records are physically in this office. And so I was doing a lot, and because I had 23 years prior government experience, I kind of knew how to maneuver that situation. And I was taking on everything. And I'm a builder. So every gap I saw, I was like, oh, I can fix that. Oh, let me go talk to that person. Let me help and see if I can do that. And by 8 months in, I was burnt, and I tell people all the time, I think I worked more during the pandemic than I did when I was in government, because I was getting up at 7, putting on my work pajamas, and I would turn around and it's 9 o'clock at night. And thank goodness I had a very supportive spouse, but I was like, did the kid get fed? Did the dog get fed? And I realized I can't do that. So my leadership lesson was, you have to take time for yourself, and you can't do everything.
Wonderful. Thank you. Nancy, how about you?
Sure. Hi, Nancy Green again. Thanks for inviting me. I'm a senior vice president at Avius, which is a division of MedDecision, which is a care management platform, and who is owned by HCSC. So really large parent company. Avius is a small boutique consulting company in healthcare around customer experience, strategy consulting, and making sure that the businesses in this fast-changing healthcare world can really survive and thrive. My background is in healthcare. My background is in the consulting and digital technology space. So it's been a fun ride. I actually came to the company in the midst of the pandemic year. So I was on my own as an independent. So that was different. What have I learned for leadership? Probably a little bit like Shonte, trying to do too much. But I think for me, it was more looking around and making sure that I was empathetic to the different things that were happening. I think we kind of just have a tendency to you're on a call, you just go and you just get business going. And then I just really learned to just listen and listen to what was going on and be able to pick things up from folks that someone might not be doing so well. And and these were not just my direct reports; these were direct reports of the team members across the globe. So, I would say that. So resilience, adaptability, empathy are the leadership things that I really kind of stood out for me in the last year or so.
Wonderful. Leon, how about you?
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Leon Scioscia. I'm the president and CEO of the Workhouse Art Center. And for those of you who don't know anything about us, we're housed in the former workhouse prison facility of the DC Correctional Complex in Loudoun, Virginia. The workhouse opened in 1920, and when it closed in 2001, the facility was transformed into an art center. Now, I've only been here for about 6 weeks, but for the last 7 years, and for most of the pandemic, I was the executive vice president at the Strathmore Hall Foundation in North Bethesda. And for those of you who don't know about Strathmore, it is a multidisciplinary art center and presenting organization. So for me, during this pandemic, and because I work in the nonprofit culture realm, I would say that the biggest leadership lesson that I've learned so far is that I'm so happy when Friday rolls around, because that means I only have 2 more days in the work week to work. We work so much in this nonprofit environment that I think the thing that I've come to realize is that, especially during the pandemic, cross-departmental training is really essential in order for us to survive. We have such a limited staff, and we have had so many staff have to be laid off, that cross-departmental training is very important for us now, and I think in the future as well.
Thank you. Yeah, good to have everybody introduce themselves here. So I'll start, and Shonte, I'll start again with you. First question to everybody. The name of this panel is Leading by Example. So what does leading by example mean to you? And I'll kind of throw in one other follow-up if you want to answer this as well. Has leading by example changed by its very nature of not everyone being physically present and everything as well?
For me, leading by example has changed, but not because of the pandemic. It's because I got older. How I used to interact with my colleagues or staff has definitely changed now that I'm knocking on a half a century. And I think leading by example also, you have to take bits and pieces from the different leaders you're engaging. And I think sometimes we try to emulate, oh, they're a great leader, let me do that. Contrary to what people think, I'm an introvert. Now, I'm an introvert that presents as an extrovert, but I may not be able to lead in the same way that someone who has a different personality than me. And so, but what I'm looking at when I'm leading by example, am I treating people fairly? Am I treating people with kindness? Am I recognizing those subtle cues that the people I'm around that something's not right? And I also want to talk about leading by example isn't always just the person at the top. Again, something I realized later in my career, there are lots of leaders out there. Not everyone is the manager or the CEO. And so you can also lead by example of not only yourself, making sure that you're treating people, but even if you're not a manager or a CEO, you can still be a leader.
Wonderful. Nancy, what are your thoughts?
Completely agree with Shonte. Again, I think leading by example has always been, just early career. Watch me. I'll do it. I'll lead by the front, lead from the front, and I still do that. I am an extrovert, and I present myself as an extrovert. My husband is an introvert, so I completely understand. So for me, you had asked a little different twist on it, right, Greg, and has it changed? And I think leading has changed a little bit in the pandemic because you really have to look at things a little differently. And I was speaking with someone this morning about this exact question, and that you have to do things a little differently when you're so remote. I have never had a problem. I've been on the road and doing things for years, never had a problem working remotely. There are a lot that have. And the leaders in those organizations, like Shonte said, kind of bubbled up to the top that were the cheerleaders and the, really worried about their teammates. And we just worked with them to show them as leaders and show the work that they're doing and the positivity that they're working on, even though not everything was positive. So for me, it's, leading by example, leading from the front, but really adding that empathy. I can't kind of overuse that word probably, but it's important. It's important to be empathetic, to understand.
Thanks. Leon, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, for me, leading by example means, and to paraphrase an old saying, you have to walk the walk and talk the talk. At Strathmore, at the height of, or the start of the pandemic, we were forced to lay off a quarter of our staff. We furloughed additional staff, and the rest of us who remained there took pretty substantial pay cuts because arts institutions were some of the first businesses to close and are still some of the last ones to truly reopen. So we were forced to make some really difficult personnel decisions. There was no earned income coming in and little, if none, non-earned income being realized. So leading by example for me is, or in this case, leading out of necessity, forced me as an arts institution leader to wear many different operational hats. As a result of this, I was able, I think, to convey to the remaining colleagues on staff that there wasn't anything that I wasn't prepared to do in order to keep the organization open, keep it vital, keep it relevant. For example, I took on, additional business office functions. I processed unemployment claims. I worked on CARES Act funding applications. I took over the security functions. I dealt with maintenance and HVAC scheduling things. I did everything that was needed to do in order to keep that organization open and hopefully getting us to a stage, or getting them to a stage now that I'm no longer there, where they could welcome 2,000 people back into the concert hall at one time.
Yeah. Great. So next question, I'll change up the order here a little bit. Nancy, if you don't mind taking this one first.
Sure.
So, this term was already mentioned today, but many people are calling this the Great Resignation. So many workers are either changing jobs or considering changing jobs, and for a lot of reasons. It's not necessarily even dissatisfaction with their actual job. It could be lots of personal reasons, or just kind of rethinking things. How does a leader preempt a resignation, or just respond to this general kind of era that we're in right now?
Yeah, I don't know how much you can preempt it. I think you can watch for it, but interesting. In the med decision world, it's a technical world, so it's a little. We haven't seen too much of the Great Resignation, kind of hitting us, because it's normally a little bit higher paid and it's a very technical type of job. But what I can tell you is that the employee base has it's a different issue. Sorry, my cat just come to spend some time with us. Is really about that their job has to mean something. If I'm going to do this, it has to mean something. Am I doing something in the right, the right way? They're just very intentional about what they're doing. So it's not that that this whole world is going to resign and change. Their priorities may change. I think one of the things I read earlier this week was something like mostly a huge percentage of the Gen Z don't want to go to work in a traditional world. They want to work by themselves and be self-employed. And that really changes the landscape completely. It's not their parents or grandparents' workforce any longer. There's no pensions to take care of them for life. They're coming into this of I want it to make a difference, and I want to be able to make my own money and be the boss of myself.
Yeah, great. Shonte, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would think of is when a leader is looking at their workforce, recognize and accept some people just might not want to work for you, and that's okay. You know what I mean? So don't take it personal. It's just what's going to happen. But I think there's two things that they should also be looking at. One, we are recognizing during this Great Resignation that some people are leaving because they're not fulfilled in their job. And so I think leaders need to look at, what am I offering? Because, again, I came from government. We always can't offer money, especially if it's a small startup or a smaller company. But what are those things that we can do to make our employees feel better about the work they're doing? Again, I'm not talking about pizza parties, right? Maybe you have a lot of, Nancy brought up the younger generations want to be more philanthropic. So can we do something where we're giving back to community, because that's going to make people feel whole? And I think the other thing that we're going to have to do as leaders is also look at the rules that we were creating, as Nancy said, for our grandparents and their grandparents. We always understood, again, not going to talk about my age, but you go to work, you drive down wherever you're going to go, you sit in 45 minutes of traffic, you work in a building, you sit in an hour and a half to get home if you're in the DMV area, and that's just life. Well, we need to really rethink that. I'm working with a lot of customers that call center does not have to be in brick and mortar anymore. Those rules can change. I come from AWS, there is technology that is going to enable people to be remote. So although we're ingrained to thinking people have to function and have a workforce or environment that looks like this, as leaders, we need to sometimes take a step back and say, do they really have to come in? Can I do flex schedules where I have working moms and dads where maybe they rather work 10 to 7 and not 9 to 5? So I think as leaders, again, as Nancy, I don't think we can head off the Great Resignation, but we can definitely look at what we're doing to make sure that the people that we do have working for us that do want to be there are having a great experience.
Leon, what are your thoughts here?
For us here in the cultural sector, I'm going to expand upon this Great Resignation term a little bit and say it's also been a great layoff and now a great rehire. The pandemic is receding for our cultural entities. Patrons are returning to performances, albeit with restrictions such as wearing face masks when you're in the performance hall, maybe even having to show proof of a COVID test. And while that's a positive step in the right direction for our industry, we have to gear back up with the necessary support personnel. We laid off the ushers, the ticket takers, the backstage production technicians, maintenance personnel, housekeeping staff. And they're hopefully they got a job somewhere else. So we're not going to be able to rehire those same exact people that we had to lay off. And that's a challenge for us in terms of retraining. So we have to, as art leaders, I think we have to find a way to shape the culture of a new team, help bring clarity to what it is that we need to do to welcome thousands of people to come back into our performance halls. And I think this new team culture can and should help our institutions achieve a revised mission. So, how do we respond? We create a new work environment. We make those folks that were left and those that are coming back to our industry feel like they're a part of something new, a new mission. And at times we'll have to keep changing as circumstances change. So for us in the cultural industry, like I said, it's not just resigning, it was a layoff, and it's now trying to rehire everybody back.
Yeah. Well, and to kind of follow up on the last point that you touched on there, it's, there's been a lot of work, I think, to change and to adapt to the current different state of being, right? So, we were going along and there's always change in business, but things sort of had their flow, and then all of a sudden we had this massive change. I think the role of the leader moving forward is not necessarily just to help people adapt to this one change, or maybe there's going to be a shift backwards. It's kind of what you touched on there, Leon, which is to be able to create this adaptivity, this continual I'm a big fan of Agile. I have a big Agile word in my background here, and a big believer in that from, both from a technical as well as from a business standpoint, is agility, resilience, whatever terms you want to use there. It's not about changing once, it's about anticipating and teaching others how to do that as well. So I guess my question, and Shonte, I'll start with you here, is how does a leader, most leaders have been through a lot of different things and have learned some of those skills. How do you pass that on to the rest of your team to help them, change and adapt as well?
I was just on a call with some internal colleagues, and one of my peers recommended something, and I was like, man, that's ingenious. When he has his staff meetings, he is not his one-on-ones with each of his members of his team. He does not ask them about what they're working on. He goes, we have all those other mechanisms, right? I'm doing evaluations. We have quarterly business reviews. We may have weekly things. He goes, I'm already getting that information. At each one-on-one he has, which is either bi-weekly, he actually asks them, what do you want to work on as a leader? And how can I help you achieve that mission? And I thought that was amazing, because a lot of times we sometimes don't talk to our staff or even our peers until it's evaluation time. And in some cultures, you're only evaluating once a year. So you're never really asking your employees, how are you doing? And it's, again, not about work. How are you doing? How are you growing? And so I think having that one-on-one dialogue about leadership, the person that you're talking to will be able to pick up on how you're leading. And then you can also have some homework, because I always say it's not a me unless there's homework, but there's something that now that person is working on for themselves. So regardless if they stay with your company or not, you're then still imparting some of your leadership qualities on them. But when I heard that, I was like, man, it's so simple, but he's right. We have so many ways to figure out the work's getting done. How about sometimes we just bring back humanity and have just a dialogue and a conversation?
Yeah, that's great. Nancy, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's a great idea. I think in the last probably several months, I've really seen it, where you have to build leadership teams with adaptable other leaders. Not everyone is adaptable, though. That they may have grown up in a world of going into an office and I'm taking care of a call center. How the heck do I do that remotely? And I don't know what to do or how to do it. So to Shonte's point, really listening to what can help them. I do some mentoring for women in healthcare, and a lot of times it's like, oh, you mean I can ask them that? Like, well, yeah. What other things could I do, or what other opportunities are there? So just to kind of keep your ear to the tone. I know for us, we've instituted team lunches, and we don't talk about work. You can't, once a month. And that's when we hear about, actually yesterday with one of the team members, her 10-year-old son was going to go ask a girl to be his girlfriend. And, it was just the funness of really learning about the team and their daily lives and the struggle that you have to go through, or the different things. So learning about that adaptability, how they're doing and what they're doing and what they want to do, I think is the key as well. We found several people who didn't particularly like the job they got put into because of changes, that they really wanted to go that way. And so that's to an earlier question, it's kind of preempting them leaving, because they really wanted to do something different. And you wouldn't have known that if you didn't just spend some time listening.
Okay. Leon, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, in our industry, I think the pandemic has shown that as leaders, we need to remain at all times flexible. For me, the key word is just flexibility. I believe cultural institutions are going to be confronting the lingering pandemic effects for a long, long time. Even with the federal CARES Act funding that we've received, it's still just a challenge. We can't remain stable. We have to remain flexible. Our entity works upon a producing environment that basically relies upon having butts in seats. And if we don't have butts in seats, then you can't have that collective kind of artistic experience. And in order to have butts in seats, then you need to have workers physically in the facility in order to facilitate all of that. So, we can't work from home. We've seen performances going virtual, but you don't have that collective experience when you're sitting with 2,000 people and you're all laughing or crying or talking about what you're seeing up on stage. It doesn't happen virtually for us. So again, I just go back to that word of flexibility. We have to figure out ways to weather the rest of this pandemic. Maybe look at some more interactive type of virtual performances, or maybe looking at some more outdoor type of performances, or doing smaller scale indoor performances with people sitting in pods, 6 feet apart from each other. Whatever we have to do to remain vital and viable as an institution, then we'll do that if we're flexible.
Well, I think we have time for maybe one or maybe two more questions, but I'll just put one out here, and I'll open this up to anybody who wants to answer. We've seen some high-profile companies, Amazon, Apple, others recently change their return to office plans, and even change from a specific date to an indeterminate one. What's your advice to leaders who are trying to I guess do a few things. I mean, one, make the right call on when to do that, but also to communicate. And there can be some anxiety with whether it's anxiety about actually returning to the office or perhaps the unknown. What advice would you have to leaders that are trying to navigate that? And Shonte, I'll put that to you. Oh.
Since you mentioned my company, so yes, Amazon, every couple of weeks we get a new, and I think we're in maybe January. I lost track. I'm a virtual employee anyway, so my commute is on a plane or a bus or a car or a train. But I think the one thing that you have to do, obviously, is communicate. And you're right, it's tricky times. I mean, I'm going to conferences right now, and sometimes I may have to get a COVID test. Sometimes I have to show my vaccination records. You have people who don't want to do either. So how do you make sure that they're still included? Do you still make them included? It's a tricky situation. Sometimes it's a legal situation. If anybody's been watching the news lately in the last couple of 24 hours, it's tricky and it's hard. I think smaller companies have maybe a different, because they may only have 5 or 6 employees, so they could actually sit down with their employees and figure out what's going to work for them. Does everybody have to come back in the office? Sometimes, again, if you're a small company, like Leon was saying, they have to be there. We have work that physically, like if you're producing a manufacturer, you physically have to be in the warehouse or, something of that nature. So I think the one thing that I would say is reach out to your colleagues that you have in the same industry and see what they're doing, because I guarantee your staff is talking to their colleagues in other companies as well. And so you never want to be like, well, what about this other company? But I think again, it goes back to what I said before, really looking at what does make business sense. Does everybody have to come back in the office if your staff isn't comfortable? If they're not comfortable, find out what you could do to make the office environment more comfortable for them. So I think that's also what we kind of missed. You're like, oh, everybody, we're going to work from home. Well, maybe as Leon said, you could do pods, or can you rearrange your office in a way, or have shifts, where somebody comes in the morning, somebody else maybe comes in the afternoon, or, but I think it's a tricky, I wish I had an easier answer. It's a tricky situation just because it is health and people, how we feel about it. But I think the one thing that you can do is figure out what makes the most sense for all of your team, not just your senior leaders, but your entire team.
And I probably add to that. So I think, I spent some time, yesterday with our chief human resource officer, because we have offices all over. We have several hundred employees at the med decision level, and we had a return to work. This was the day, and then it came to we're not sure. To your point, it absolutely has to be communicated, and then it was communicated that, listen, the Delta variant has really changed this. We're not going to do it. You have to go back, and then it really has morphed into this kind of a soft launch is what they're calling it. All of our offices have key codes so we know who, so you can go in whenever you want. There are some rules that you have to follow, but earlier statements, it was the prior panel was a little bit of, okay, if you wear a mask but you don't, you're supposed to stay 6 feet apart. And we were kind of laughing about it. It's like, what do you do? Carry, pool, party pool things or yardsticks? I mean, how in the heck you're going to do that? But I think the two things that she really pointed out was that culturally you have to be very aware what's happening in the cultural in that particular office. And the other thing that she said is that is to really be very flexible, but to teach you, they're going through an entire teaching of the managers on how to watch for and manage through flexibility. So some want to go into the office for a while, then go home, pick up their kid, and then go just stay home and finish their day up. But, too much flexibility, I guess they found some people who were doing gig jobs, because we were giving them so much flexibility. They were Uber driving at the, time. So you have to put some rules around it so that it makes sense. I think is probably the best thing that she was talking about, was really looking at, you have to be able to provide the flexibility for them to be able to do what they need to do.
I think that I would agree with my two panel colleagues here. And I would further say that, you have to do what is right for your particular institution, your particular business model. I've been talking a lot about the Strathmore, but I'll end up by talking a little bit about Workhouse. And we have over 60, maybe 65 artists in actual studios. This is where they come and they create their art. So if you're going to be throwing a pot, if you're working with clay, if you're working in fusing glass, if you're painting a mural that's 20 feet wide by 20 feet high, you can't really do that at home. You have to be here. So what's right for this institution is not going to be right for any other institution. So I would just say, to leaders, listen to your staff, listen to your colleagues, listen to your heart, and just do what's right for you.
I would add too that one of the things that they really, really looked at from the CEO level down was, is it a business necessity to go back to the office? Shonte, you and I are both virtual. I have a Dallas office. I've never been in it. They were about to open a brand new office today. Everything shut down. And so it's a beautiful downtown Dallas office. Never been in it. And so they had to really look at, do we really have to? We've done pretty well in a completely virtual world. So is it necessary? Is it a forced, and it's not going to be a forced comeback?
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much to everybody. It's been a great discussion, and I would love to reconvene this at some point in the future. Would love to have everybody back to one of our events. But thanks so much for taking the time today. Thanks again for listening to the Agile World podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can learn more and get a copy of my latest book, The Agile Workforce, from my website at theagile.world.